Hello YouTube. Welcome to Secret Fact. How 5 of history's worst pandemics finally ended.
Over the edge, feel like I'm floating through the air. The pain I felt is paid for all.
As human civilizations flourished, so did infectious disease. Large numbers of people living in close proximity to each other and to animals, often with poor sanitation and nutrition, provided fertile breeding grounds for disease. Here's how 5 of the world's worst pandemics finally ended. One plague of Justinian, no one left to die. 3 of the deadliest pandemics in recorded history were caused by a single bacterium, Yersinia pestis, a fatal infection otherwise known as the plague. The plague of Justinian arrived in Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, in 541 CE. It was carried over the Mediterranean Sea from Egypt, a recently conquered land, paying tribute to Emperor Justinian in grain. Plague-ridden fleas hitched a ride on the black rats that snacked on the grain. As to how the plague ended, the best guess is that the majority of people in a pandemic somehow survive, and those who survive have immunity.
I'm finally facing it all, fearless.
2. Black Death, the invention of quarantine. The plague never really went away, and when it returned 800 years later, it killed with reckless abandon. The Black Death, which hit Europe in 1347, claimed an astonishing 200 million lives in just 4 years. As for how to stop the disease, people still had no scientific understanding of contagion, says Makatis, but they knew that it had something to do with proximity. At first, sailors were held on their ships for 30 days, which became known in Venetian law as a Trentino. As time went on, the Venetians increased the forced isolation to 40 days or a quarantino, the origin of the word quarantine and the start of its practice in the Western world.
The story's over now, I must conclude.
3. The Great Plague of London, sealing up the sick. London never really caught a break after the Black Death. The plague resurfaced roughly every 20 years from 1348 to 1665, 40 outbreaks in 300 years. And with each new plague epidemic, 20% of the men, women, and children living in the British capital were killed. By the early 1500s, England imposed the first laws to separate and isolate the sick. Homes stricken by plague were marked with a bale of hay strung to a pole outside. If you had infected family members, you had to carry a white pole when you went out in public. As cruel as it was to shut up the sick in their homes and bury the dead in mass graves, it may have been the only way to bring the last great plague outbreak to an end. 4. Smallpox, a European disease, ravages the New World. Smallpox was endemic to Europe, Asia, and Arabia for centuries, a persistent menace that killed 3 out of 10 people it infected and left the rest with pockmarked scars. The indigenous peoples of modern-day Mexico and the United States had zero natural immunity to smallpox, and the virus cut them down by the tens of millions. Centuries later, smallpox became the first virus epidemic to be ended by a vaccine. In the late 18th century, a British doctor named Edward Jenner discovered that milkmaids infected with a milder virus called cowpox seemed immune to smallpox. And he was right. It took nearly 2 more centuries, but in 1980 the World Health Organization announced that smallpox had been completely eradicated from the face of the earth. Cholera, a victory for public health research. In the early to mid-19th century, cholera tore through England, killing tens of thousands. The prevailing scientific theory of the day said that the disease was spread by foul air known as a miasma. But a British doctor named John Snow suspected that the mysterious disease, which killed its victims within days of the first symptoms, lurked in London's drinking water. Snow acted like a scientific Sherlock Holmes, investigating hospital records and morgue reports to track the precise locations of deadly outbreaks. He created a geographic chart of cholera deaths over a 10-day period and found a cluster of 500 fatal infections surrounding the Broad Street Pump, a popular city well for drinking water. While cholera has largely been eradicated in developed countries, it's still a persistent killer in third world countries lacking adequate sewage treatment and access to clean drinking water. If you want to know amazing facts and history about world biggest pandemic Spanish flu, want to know about Spanish flu and coronavirus, all information link in the description or click on the I button. If you new in this channel, see others video also.